and imagination. Now what, some people are not very imaginative. What do people in general mean by imagination? Well, it's like virtual reality. In the postmodern world, there's no difference between reality and virtual reality. Huh? So you can't tell the difference. Well, then what happens to human psyches when they can't tell the difference between the real world and their imagined world? Aha! But see, I have a dictionary on the psychiatric institution's dictionary of what these are. I'd say in the postmodern world, these are just alternative lifestyles and behavior patterns. These aren't negative factors. These are just factors. They said, no, we'd be out of work if we paid attention to you. I said, that'd be good. Well, intuition. Now, how do you know that 10 to the 55th power, the answer is correct? Do you study it and do research on it, or how do you do it? Self-evident. No, that drives the postmodern world up the wall. That self-evident program. Yeah. Now that's what it is, an immediacy of experience. Now everyone has experience. Just like we mentioned about Schleiermacher and German liberalism. He was not dealing with science. Biblical criticism had removed the Bible from the church's hand, so he's going to gefühl us. In his Christian faith, he completely reinterprets every category of the biblical material.
Faith and faith.
He has faith in faith, and that does not escape Kierkegaard's leap of faith. Kierkegaard's leap of faith is that there's no reason for it, but you just leap. Well, unfortunately, that's where most people are. So it's partly not false, but it's just not correct that they ought to make that judgment. Anyway, these are the things that unpack in that milieu. Imagination, you have no imagination, make up something, immediacy, experience, and what big thing in the 18th, 19th century, even though this is a biblical doctrine and every culture has some category like that, what happened in this? It's right up here. Freedom.
They were reacting against mechanistic determinism.
Now, freedom. What did we have the American Revolution for? Why did we have the French Revolution? What for? Freedom. Well, what is it? See, the Bible, the biblical doctrine of freedom, we're not freedom from everything. We're freedom to do things. We're free to do the Lord's will. We're not free to do as we please. Well, absolute freedom. Even Jean-Paul Sartre, one of the gurus of the counterculture in the 60s in France, knew that absolute freedom was insanity. Well, what's the difference? There's no norms. What's the difference between absolute insanity and absolute non-insanity?
You're free to jump off the building, but you're not free to control.
But you're not free. It's the impact that's going to get to that position. Jumping is not the problem. It's the fall that's the problem. Well, see, existentialism is an irrational effort to deal with science in the phenomenological and existential world of the 19th, 20th century in France. And all this stems from efforts to try to evade the impact of science and technology on the Western world. Now, instead of evaluating that and bringing that under a Christian worldview analysis, they rebelled against those as what happens with technology, what happens with scientific information. Or act like it's not there, or that it's just for a few weird intellectuals here off in Nana land someplace. And that might be sometimes the case, but enlightenment, all these dynamics, and in that, here's Methodism, and it started in where? Wesley was an Episcopalian. He had no intention of starting the Methodist Church. But he did have an intention of doing what in the church? The moral fiber of the church. Nothing evil about that. Well, he felt, and his followers felt that they had to get out of the Episcopal Church because you couldn't do what with it? Reform it. Well, that's not false. They couldn't. So you get the Methodist church. You know, that's just a word. The Methods had methods. But that's not the theological history of Methodism. Methodism were Arminianism. They were not Calvinists. See, I'm neither a Calvinist nor an Arminian nor an Augustinian. See, that lumps me with a whole lot of people. But what is Pietism? Yes, what? Yes, you said it. Don't be frightened. No one will harm you in this room. Piety. Well, why do you need piety? What's piety? How is piety adjudged by the counterculture? Piety, who were the pious people? Yeah. This is not false. In Jesus, that's correct. Thank you very much. Huh? Who were the pietists in the Reformation? Who? Piety is behavior. Has nothing to do with belief. It's how you behave. Well, when you separate how you behave from what you believe, you're in trouble.
So was it an attempt to try to have holiness without God?
Now, no, they had God, but he didn't have anything to do with anything.
He was a given.
He was a given. See, that's not in that debate with it. But pietism, or piety, is trying to recover some moral stamina in the church when the church didn't have any. Well, how come the church didn't have any? Because once you have the institutional form of the church, you don't need what? It's already taken care of. Isn't that true? Don't people say, well, I've been a church member for 65 years. I've been an elder for 44 years. I was an elder while I was still a baby. They made you one. Okay. No, but that doesn't mean anything one way or another. I hear you, but that didn't tell you anything to me of usefulness. I've told people that told me that. I said, now when you have anything to say significantly, come talk to me again. Now, the resistance, every time there's a return to the biblical foundations, there's renewal. This is our heritage, see, as you come to the American frontier. Have you ever had any reason to have heard of Turner's frontier thesis? Turner was the priest of all disciple historiographers in Chicago and Duke and East. Turner in Iowa, for some odd reason, Iowa was an intellectual center in the universe, but it's never been since. But I don't know what it's there, but that's it. But you never heard of Turner? Turner was a Marxist, and he was interpreting local autonomy on the basis of a Marxian interpretation. Why individualism, American individualism? They think you get individualism out of the frontier spirit. You heard that. If you even got C in Restoration history, you know that. That's what they claim. I mean, that's what you know. Well, anyway, biblical Christianity. But we've gone through the whole history from the time of Jesus, time Paul and Mary. They're a singing group, Peter, Paul, and Mary. They sang that group, and the whole history of the church doesn't save you. But I think we need to recover something like the Mark Knowles turning points in the history of the church in education as Christian, just to locate these problems. They're not solved, they locate them. Where did all this come from? So no one thinks that the world started when they got here. That's the problem of education. You're not saved by getting A in history or church history, but you don't know where you are if you don't know where you've been.
But postmodernism, you don't need history.
Oh, postmoderns are revisionist history. They just change history. They change everything. So they're anti-science and revisionist history. Yeah, they fix everything up to meet the gender specifications of the postmodern gender war.